You're listening to Little Green Cheese, Episode 10. Well, welcome back. I'm Gavin Weber, and this podcast is where you can learn about cheese making at home. Well, this week we have an interview with a lady called Carole Castles, and she's a home cheesemaker and lives on a farm. Pretty self-sufficient from what I hear. So let's have a listen to the interview.
I was fascinated to find your blog a little while back, and I can't even remember how I found it now. It must have been probably a link through somebody else. And of course, you don't know how many home cheesemakers there are out there until you start yourself, do you?
That's right. You really don't know. You know, it's only through interviews and chasing people up after they comment on the blog that you actually find out, you know, how many are really out there. And there's quite a few.
Oh, there seem to be lots. And, you know, it's just because of the way the world is, the majority of people that you bump into on a daily basis will just probably think you're a bit crazy. And it's very easy not to realise how many like-minded folks there are out there.
Yeah, no, there's a lot. So where exactly do you live?
I live just outside of Crookwell in New South Wales. So inland from Goulburn a bit.
Oh, okay, yeah.
About 40 minutes drive from Goulburn, about an hour and a quarter from Canberra. And we're at 900 metres, so it gets cool up here and it gets hot up here.
Oh, I bet. So you will get pretty bad frosts as well?
Yeah, we get frost down to about -8, -10. But we don't often get snow. The snow line around here is at about 1,000 metres. So we get a little bit of snow, but it tends not to lie for more than, you know, a day or two at the most. And we've had a very mild and moderately soggy winter for us this year. So, yeah, the world's all a bit confused at the moment, the garden.
Isn't it just? Yeah, we're experiencing temperatures that are unseasonably high here. So you live on a farm, yeah?
Yeah, we're on 120 acres.
Yep.
And I'm retired from the paid workforce.
Oh, okay, good.
But I tell people that this is my living. You can make a living by earning income.
Yes.
Or you can make a living by not spending it.
That's right, or making stuff yourself.
Yeah. So in fact, we have a small beef herd of about 22 breeders and a bull.
Yep.
But you know, I've got 3 ewes and a ram, which is enough for lambs, and we buy in piglets once a year, and I make my own bacon and ham and sausage, and so all of the meat's home kill here.
Yep. So do you have some milking cows?
I have 2 Jersey girls.
Oh, lovely.
And in fact, having been cheese obsessed my entire life, that's what really started me making my own, because I suddenly had far more milk than I knew what to do with.
Oh, okay. So what started this obsession besides the 2 cows?
The obsession started just because I've always loved cheese. And from being a little girl, I have a very strong memory of being about 7 years old. And there was one night of the week that I used to go to sort of probably a swimming lesson, so I had to have a very light tea before I went out. My mother used to give me, this was in the UK, and she used to give me fresh bread and Philly cheese and pickled onions.
Oh, lovely.
Or Wensleydale, which was much closer to where we lived, actually.
Yeah.
But so I grew up with those sort of things, and I think I said I wrote an essay for school on how to make cheese when I was about 8 or 9 or something.
Okay.
And you know, I've got a lot of friends who'll tell you that I've said many times that if somebody told me I wasn't ever allowed to eat chocolate again, I'd be sad, but okay.
Yeah.
But don't tell me I'm never allowed to eat cheese again, because I shall just go and curl up and die right now.
Incredible. So
I've always loved cheese of almost every variety.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And the opportunity to make my own arose when I became inundated with milk.
Oh, okay. So what year did that start?
Well, I've only had the cow since last year.
Oh, okay. So you've made how many cheeses since then?
Oh, last time I sat down and looked at the cheese log, which has got some holes in it, I might add, I'm up over 150.
That's incredible.
Because when I'm milking both of the girls, I'm getting 18 to 20 litres a day, and I only milk once a day.
Yeah.
And I'm only milking one of the ladies at the moment, because the other one's a dried-up lady-in-waiting.
Yep.
So I get 10 litres of Jersey milk a day.
That's incredible. That makes a lot of cheese, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and I can actually end up completely slaved to the cheese. So I've actually, in the season when I actually have pigs here, and I don't at the moment, I don't feel too badly about feeding them. They get all the cheese whey anyway.
Yeah.
But I don't feel too badly about feeding them excess milk. But I feel really bad about throwing excess milk into the compost heap.
I can imagine.
So that's one of the reasons why we dried up one of the jerseys early.
Oh, okay.
But I skim milk for butter 4 days of the week, and I make cheese 2 days of the week. And 1 day of the week I bottle it for some close family who like to have a bottle of milk from us.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Once in a while too. So that stops me from being completely chained to a stirring pot.
Yeah. No, it's good to make it a couple of times a week. Well, I only make it once a fortnight now. So.
Oh, right.
And yeah, so I was making it once a week there for a while, for about a year. And then
I was making it every second day for a while,
yeah.
And the novelty was wearing off.
I wouldn't say the novelty was wearing off for me. It was that my garden was beginning to become neglected. So
well, I've now sort of rationalised what I make. I mean, I make anything at one time or another.
Yep.
But most of the time, I make either I make a Caerphilly style, I make a stirred curd cheddar style, and I make a washed curd more like a Havarti.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And because I tend to do these at a lower temperature, that slows the whole process down, and I actually get some of my normal work done in between.
Oh, goodness, that's really good. So you don't make any Yeah, it does go a bit chunky though, but I suppose you have to stir a little bit harder.
Yeah, you just sort of like scrub your forearms and stick your hand in the pan and break it back up again.
Yeah. So where do you make all this wonderful cheese?
In the kitchen.
Oh,
I have
okay.
a large sort of eat-in kitchen. We don't have a dining room, so it's very much the nerve centre of the house. So I have one steel pot that'll take about 16 litres.
Okay, yeah.
And another one that takes 10, and another one that takes 5. So I've had 33 litres of milk on the stove at once in various pans.
Goodness me.
But that was not my best day.
I bet.
No,
It gets a bit confusing.
I'd accumulated too much and had to do something with it.
Yes.
But most of the time, I just love it. I love the fact that for me, it's not a very standardized process, because I'll go away and do something else or end up having to, go and tend to some animal or something and come back an hour after I had anticipated I would.
Yep.
But I've never produced anything inedible yet. I've produced some moderately ordinary cheeses, but I have to build into my thinking of that the milk varies so much as well.
Yeah, it would,
unlike
wouldn't
if
it?
you're using a commercial milk, my milk varies with the season.
Yeah.
And when I'm share milking with carbs, I don't get as much fat. I don't get as much butter fat in the milk.
Yeah.
So I went through quite a season of my cheeses being not dry, but relatively firm and crumbly. And that wasn't to do with the making of them. It had much more to do with the fact that I was probably not getting as much fat as I normally would in the milk at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, different variables than you might be dealing with if you were buying the milk in.
Yeah, so some of the milks that you get in the supermarket, they're a bit dubious of their quality as well, even though people seem to drink them. But look, I think that the home cheese maker and probably the dairy cheese maker as you are would have similar sort of challenges. You're talking about milk quality. Really, you've got to pick, unfortunately for me, I've got to pick the most expensive milk to get the non-homogenized sort of stuff that, makes a really good curd, whereas you probably wouldn't have too much trouble with that. It'd just be the overall...
I've never had a problem with my setting.
Yeah. No,
I do. I generally make my cheese with raw milk.
Yep.
Because that's just one whole time-consuming process I don't really need, trying to fit this in with the rest of my life. But I've found that for the sake of predictability, I'm best off pasteurizing first for making white mold and blue mold cheeses.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think I'm just removing, the normal lactobacilli that I have in my milk. I'm better off getting rid of those in some circumstances where at least I can standardise the product a bit more. I produced some interesting, edible but slightly funky camemberts at one stage. and I think it was just the competition between the normal lactobacilli in my milk and the culture that I'd added. But it doesn't make any difference for any of the firmer cheeses.
Yeah, I think
And I do pasteurize for things like sour cream and yogurt, partly because they set better.
Yep.
When they've been heat treated, and again partly for the purity of the culture and the predictability of what I'm going to get. But apart from that, everything else around here is done with raw milk.
Oh, nice. No, that's really good. So, did you say you had a goat?
No.
So you haven't tried goats
too? That was my fallback option, you see.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I sort of have rumbled under my breath about having a dairy cow for about the last 5 years. And my husband sort of, no way, not know how you ever having a dairy cow. Because his only experience of dairying was school holiday jobs on a commercial dairy.
Yeah.
And frankly, that would put a lot of people off. That's the 4 o'clock starts and twice a day, and it's a very onerous job. Huge respect for people who actually work in commercial dairying.
Yeah, my dad did that for many, many years.
But I sort of kept on trying to convince him that if I share milked with the calf, and that meant I only had to milk once a day, and even I could miss a day once in a while, and he just looked sceptical. And then he met a lot of articles about the strange things they've been doing to our milk supply, and I must admit that I had something to do with that.
Oh.
And he came to me one day and he said, "That's it, we're in the market for a Jersey cow."
Excellent.
And then he said, "Well, if you want me to help out with this, I think we need a portable milking machine and a second cow."
Oh, okay. No,
and
good.
So we went from a nice idea to being inundated.
That's incredible. So start off with thinking, we'll just have one cow. Let's have two.
And because every time he said I couldn't have a dairy cow, I said, "Well, in that case, I'll have a goat." He says, "Oh my God, no, you won't."
Yeah. Hey, at least you don't have to do it by hand.
Well, I still finish by hand.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Because just to make sure that I get the lovely, rich, buttery hind milk. Because the first milk that comes through is relatively high in sugars and proteins. And it's not until quite late in the milking that you start to get the butterfat, which is why when you're share milking with a calf, the cow actually holds up the hind milk and saves it for the calf.
Yeah.
So you end up with a little bit less of the butterfat.
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah, so I tend to hand finish now, and that's my way of tricking the girls out of the good bits.
So you get a little bit more cream there too.
But yeah, when I'm milking like 20 litres a day out of 2 cows, it's much easier to use the machine. With one cow, it wouldn't take me too long to milk her by hand, but I think the novelty might wear off on very cold days if I was trying to hand milk the 2.
Yes. So what time do you milk them?
7:30.
Oh, not 4 a.m. like my dad used to then.
Yeah, when I get out of bed and get dressed. And cut up some pumpkin, because they're complete trollops and they're anybody's for a bucket full of pumpkin spice.
Goodness me.
Or potato. And they're the only animal I have found that willingly eats citrus.
Oh, right.
Because even your worms won't eat citrus.
No, they won't. No, they don't
and the
at all.
chooks won't eat the bloody citrus. So, but cows love it.
Yeah. So
all of my misshapen citrus goes into the cow bucket as well.
Oh, okay. So we talked about some of your challenges. So what are your favourite cheeses to make?
I think that's a difficult question, because I really there are some of them that I enjoy making because I don't do them very often, and therefore they're a bit of a challenge. And I don't make blue mold and white mold cheeses very often. So they're always a bit special.
Yes.
I make the 30-minute mozzarella, and I enjoy that because like most people, I like quick results.
Yeah.
So I like different cheeses for different reasons. For myself, my favourite cheese to eat would have to be a good mature cheddar.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I also love those slightly more lactic crumblies like Wensleydale and Caerphilly that aren't quite such long maturation cheeses. Partly because I grew up on them, and you really can't buy them in Australia.
No, I know, and I've never heard. Well, I'd heard of Wensleydale, Wallace and Gromit, who hasn't?
Yeah.
And then once I made it myself, I thought, my God, this is an amazing cheese.
Well, I've
And
got several friends who've actually travelled in the UK or lived there at one time or another who come over and sit and eat huge quantities of it in my kitchen once in a while because you can't get it anywhere else.
no, you can't buy it in the shop. I've looked. I really have. And I've
No.
even gone to specialty. There was a cheese shop in Melbourne, and they didn't stock it.
No, but I don't think it's a good cheese probably for world distribution.
Yeah.
Because it's a relatively short maturation cheese, and if it didn't catch on at the other end, you'd probably end up with with it having to sit around in the cheese cave for a little bit too long.
Yeah, it'd get quite strong and probably very, very crumbly.
It does. It just falls apart completely.
Yeah.
I have to say that I don't particularly mind it when it's like that. But it's, it's a different cheese by the time it gets to that stage.
Yeah, I find that if you mature a farmhouse cheddar, same sort of thing, gets quite crumbly.
Yeah.
I let one mature for a year, and the flavour was fantastic, but you couldn't cut it with a knife. It'd just fall apart. It was incredible.
I think the biggest challenge I've had with what I think of as, the pressed or harder cheeses is, and I think, and I'm assuming it harks back to my lack of butter fat earlier in the season, is that none of my cheddars melted very well.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's the reduced fat thing. I mean, commercial reduced fat cheeses, I have no idea what they do to those to make them taste like cheese.
Yeah.
And in fact, I probably don't want to know.
You probably don't.
So I've got some nicer high-fat cheddars sitting in there, but they're only about 3 months old at the moment, so I'm smack my hands every time I get to go and get one out. I've opened I have opened a 10-month-old Parmesan lately, which was very nice, and I re-waxed the rest of it and put it back.
Yeah.
The Romano with black peppercorns, I managed to leave that in there for 7 months, and that was extremely nice.
Oh,
but neither of those type of cheeses that use that method, particularly mind using a lower fat milk, because you'd not often standardise it to a 2 or 3% fat anyway.
Yeah.
Before you made those. So the texture of those has turned out perfectly well, but I would have to admit that the cheddar styles have tended to be a bit on the dry, crumbly side, and I think that's a milk fat issue.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to the ones that are sitting in there brewing at the moment.
Nice. Yeah, I found that the cheddars that I've made, well, I suppose I made a Cotswold recently, and I'm going to release the video for it in the next week or so.
I've got one vacked in the I've got an old fridge that the reconditioned fridge that the repairman jiggered the thermostat on for me.
Oh, okay, nice.
So it normally runs at around about 12 degrees, and in this weather I just turn it off and use it as an insulated cabinet.
Yeah.
But it got too full. So the rest of mine are all stacked in the downstairs shower at the moment.
Well, that'll be nice and humid anyway.
Well, it's the coolest part of the house.
Yeah.
And it's also the place where every now and then somebody will go into my laundry and find a big sign that says off limits, go somewhere else on the downstairs shower and loo, because I've got salamis hanging in the shower at that stage as well.
That's
Not
incredible.
at the moment. But because it's nice and cool, I have a tendency to use it as my backup cheese cave.
So you get so much cheese. So what's your favourite cheese to eat? You mentioned the cheddars and stuff. Anything in particular
the three I make most of the time would be Caerphilly, because I like the crumbly lactic sort of taste of that. A nice cheddar, and as a washed curd cheese, I usually make a Havarti.
Oh, okay. Is
and
that's
I've
similar?
tried all of those with various flavourings. I've made the Caerphillies with sage, which is sort of fairly standard. I've done Havarti with caraway seeds.
Yeah.
I make a sort of a Cotswold with chives and dried onions.
Yeah.
But what was the other one I've done? Oh, that's right. I did a Havarti with smoked jalapeno with chipotle chili flakes.
Yeah.
And that was divine.
That would have been amazing.
Yeah. So I've got huge jars of smoked
Chili
red
flakes.
jalapenos up in the pantry from last season. So I actually put some of those into the cheese, and it's very hit and miss, isn't it, when you don't really know how much to put in. But
Yeah, I think if you
luck
put...
was on my side, and it worked out really well.
Yeah,
Got a nice kick and a slightly smoky flavour.
I find if you put more than 2 teaspoons in, if you only, because I make only 8-litre batches, if I put more than 2 teaspoons of anything additional, then it overpowers the cheese and takes away the flavour of the cheese.
Yeah, you don't want to lose the cheese in it. That would be pointless.
Yeah, so it'd be like having a little bit of cheese with some flavour instead, the wrong way around.
Yeah, so now that I've weaned the carbs and got all of my butter fat, I'm into butter making in a big way. And the nice thing, of course, about butter is that I can make it when I've got the resources available and freeze it for when I haven't.
Yeah.
So I've made cultured and uncultured butter and miscellaneous, all the usual soft stuff. I make yogurt or labneh, and I make like cream cheeses. I tend to use half and half to make a nice cream cheese.
Yeah. What about clotted cheeses and stuff like that? Clotted cream.
I've made like large curd cottage cheese.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, it's infinitely nicer than anything you can buy in the shop.
Oh, I bet.
Because frankly, the stuff in the shop's horrible anyway.
Yeah, I find that with the cream cheese as well is ghastly.
And I use the drained yogurt cheese with herbs and garlic because it's got a really nice tang.
Oh, that'd be
or
fabulous.
I do it with dill and serve it with we tend to make home cured salmon. We make gravlax for Christmas.
Yep.
So with the herby yogurt cheese, that's really, really nice too.
Oh, be yummy. Very nice.
So there's nothing nicer than, or more really sort of bone marrow satisfying than actually putting out a cheese board with things that you've made yourself.
So what would you drink with your cheese board?
I like a relatively lighter style red wine, like a Pinot Noir.
Yep.
My husband's a Shiraz or Cabernet man.
Yeah.
And I like cider. I like dry cider with cheese, not a sweet cider.
It is
but
nice,
I like
isn't
dry
it?
cider with cheese.
That
would be my other choice.
Oh, fabulous. I love the Pinots, the Merlots that go with it. Sometimes
something softer,
Yeah.
something that hasn't got too much tannin.
Yeah, but if you have something, a really flavoured cheese, like one with chilies or maybe the Cotswold with pickled onions, with those dried onion flakes and chives.
The onions, yeah.
Yeah, you need something a little bit stronger, something maybe a Shiraz or something like that.
Yeah, but he drinks Cabernet Sauvignon, and that's just usually a little bit too heavy for me.
Yeah.
So I'll go to a nice Shiraz, but not so often.
Yeah.
And in hot weather, truly, I do like a really nice dry cider with some of the cheeses. It goes very nicely. I've made fondue with cider instead of with some white wine.
That'd be lovely.
And that's very, very nice as well.
That's fantastic. So what? There's lots of newbie cheesemakers out there. So what words of encouragement would you have for these new cheesemakers?
Oh, just do it.
Sound like Nike.
I'm a scientist by training, so I think having an understanding of the biology was helpful to me, but it's by no means necessary. I suggest you just find some reasonable instructions. And what I love about your video tutorials, Gavin, is the thing that you can't get from a book is what does the curd look like when it's ready.
Yeah, true.
And to see you sometimes squeeze a piece of curd and get an idea of perhaps how squeaky or how firm it is incredibly helpful. But apart from that, just get yourself a set of instructions and have a go.
That's right. Get into it.
It's unlikely you will produce anything unpalatable.
Oh, I've done it once.
Oh, yeah.
I made a Gouda that was not Gouda-ish at all. I don't know what it was, but I ended up eating half of it and the chickens ate the other half, unfortunately.
I have, my chickens eat fairly well, and there have been times when the pigs ate fairly well, but not because it was particularly unpalatable, but sometimes because it was very dry or ordinary,
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, I would tell people just, don't be put off by the process. Just, get a set of I encourage people to make things like feta because I think it's quite easy, and the 30-minute mozzarella is very easy to make, but don't think it's terribly easy to get right.
No, it does take a little bit of finesse, doesn't it?
It takes a bit of practice to get the feel for what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I've got quite a lot of my friends now that start with yogurt, and then they drain it and they make labneh or yogurt cheese.
Yeah. And
then they've played with a culture, and the only other thing thereafter is to get the idea of playing with a bit of rennet. I'm probably one of the last generations that grew up with junket.
Jeez, with junket.
which wasn't necessarily a good thing.
No.
But I do get a little frustrated trying to use recipes from lots of different sources with trying to standardize the rennet dose for a certain amount of milk. And I find myself using my high school algebra.
Yes, it is. It is a bit. Some of the instructions are a bit dubious. I know some of the cheese books that I've read lately, they leave steps out. They leave, and you only learn this through experience after you've made X amount of cheese. And I find one I rewrote the other day left out the main ingredient, which was salt. I couldn't believe it.
How could you not put salt in that?
It won't work.
Not really, is it?
It tastes like rubbish.
Yeah, just rubbery rubbish.
Yeah.
But I find, say, if I'm using an American recipe or it depends on where you get your rennet from, how strong it's going to be.
Yeah, exactly. It's very hard to tell.
That the liquid rennet that I use produces, if I use 2 mils in 10 litres of milk, it will generally produce a clean break in around about 45 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
And I use that as so if I find a cheesemaker, I go and I find out how do they make cheddar and how much of their rennet do they use for that amount of milk. And then I get my pen and paper out and work out, therefore, how much of mine do I need to, oh, goodness me.
Yeah.
But not being able to standardise rennet doses I find frustrating.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing.
Yes, I think if you use the, what's it called? The flocculation method is a good way, a good rule of thumb as well. I've come across some recipes that say use double strength rennet, and you go, what the? And because I can only get single strength.
And even then, double strength compared to what?
Yeah, exactly. Double strength
of
what?
And I've worked out that most of the American recipes, their rennet is definitely weaker than the stuff I'm using, and I use about 2/3 of the amount that they say for the same amount of milk.
I find the same with cultures as well. That the US books have massive amounts of culture.
Started off with the Wilman's book.
Oh, okay. She's from around Lara, I think, a Little River.
Yeah, and tend to buy my supplies from Cheese Links, who are the same people.
Yes.
And therefore, I've got a textbook that standardises the rennet that I buy to certain volumes of milk for certain styles of cheese.
Yeah.
And that gives me a starting point to then go and jump off and use somebody else's recipe.
Yeah, sounds good.
But I have to say that much as I love cheese making, it's part of my everyday life, and I cannot be a slave to it. And that's my problem with. I love the flocculation method, and I've played with it.
Yeah.
But I just cannot put aside that many hours in a day, 2 or 3 times a week, to use up the volume of milk I've got. So I have a tendency to do what temperature is it when I get it out the cow? Oh, look, by the time I get it home, it'll
be the right temperature, yeah.
It's about 30 degrees. Well, I'll throw some culture in it, and I'll come back in an hour and see, and then I'll throw some rennet in it.
Yeah.
And I'll come back in an hour and see what it looks like. Well, it looks like I should cut it up about now. And I have to say that for the 3 styles of cheese I make most of the time, that works perfectly well.
That sounds good. Sounds good. Well, it's been lovely talking to you, Carole. Thanks very much for coming on the Little Green Cheese podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope everybody else takes the advice and just has a go.
Oh, I hope so too. It's great fun, isn't it?
It's fantastic and it's so satisfying.
All right. See you later, Carole.
Bye, Gavin. Bye.
Bye. Well, that's all we got time for this episode. For upcoming workshop dates, you can find recipes all at littlegreencheese.com. You can also find my ebook, Keep Calm and Make Cheese, The Beginner's Guide to Cheese Making at Home. You can also find my cheese making video tutorials within the ebook or on my YouTube channel. Just search for Greening of Gavin. Thanks for listening, Curd Nerds, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Little Green Cheese podcast. During this podcast, you heard royalty-free music by Kevin MacLeod. I played Malt Shop Bop, News Theme, and Call to the Dairy Cows.